Our opening reading this morning is entitled Calling by Reverend Nancy Schaefer. When you heard that voice and knew finally it called for you and what it was saying, where were you? Were you in the shower, wet and soapy, or chopping cabbage late for dinner? Were you planting radish seeds or seeking one lost sock? Maybe wiping handprints off a window or coaxing words into a sentence, or coming upon a hyacinth or one last no. Where were you when you heard that ancient voice? And did yes get born right then? And did you weep? Had it called you since before you even were? And when you knew that, did your joy escape all holding? Where were you when you heard that calling voice? And how in the moment did you mark it? How ever after are you changed? Tell us, please, all you can about that voice. Teach us how to listen, how to hear. Teach us all you can of saying yes. Where were you when you heard that calling voice? And how in the moment did you mark it? I knew that I had said yes to you when, during the search process, I spontaneously went onto Craigslist and found a man in South Attleboro selling 2 used kayaks from his house. On the phone, he said he'd had other offers, and if I really wanted them, I would have to come right then. Yes, I said, I'll be there. Hanging up the phone, the difficulty of the logistics of this purchase began to surface. How on earth would I fit 2 kayaks into my little Honda Civic? And where exactly was I going to put 2 full-sized kayaks in my landlocked second-floor Boston apartment? But I couldn't back out now. These 2 kayaks had quickly become symbolic of a much larger yes. Yes to taking a risk. Yes to the exciting and excruciating invitation to spend a week getting to know almost 100 of you and then be voted on at the end. Yes to leaving my inner city social justice ministry for a quirky, lovable parish on the outermost tip of Cape Cod. Yes to following my heart. But once you have said yes, it's amazing how the details seem to work themselves out. I drove from Boston to Plymouth, where I picked up my father's truck and a companion for the drive, my mother, ever ready for an adventure. South Attleboro was a little bit further than I thought, basically Rhode Island. But we persevered, even as darkness began to fall and my GPS guided us off of the main roads and onto tiny back roads with no street lamps. I chatted cheerfully at my mother, not wanting to look at her in case I might find her face giving expression to the thoughts I was beginning to have. Mainly, whose idea was this? But finally we arrived at our destination, and in the darkness I could just make out the shadows of 2 sleek Emotion Glide kayaks lying in the front yard as if in a quiet harbor. My yes swelled up in my heart again. The seller helped us hoist the boats into the truck and secure them with bungee cords, and we began to retrace our steps in reverse in the darkness. An hour and a half later, we were lugging the kayaks off of the truck and into my mother's shed, where she had graciously agreed to store them for an unspecified amount of time. further logistics of actually securing the job, and then Cape Cod housing in the height of summer would come later. I returned the truck and then, back in my little Civic, turned north toward Boston. But already my heart was east across the bay, where on a very clear day you can see the tower in Provincetown from my uncle's porch on Plymouth Beach. Driving home, I knew my yes would keep. Tell us, please, all you can about that voice. Teach us how to listen, how to hear. Teach us all you can of saying yes. As I began to prepare for this sermon, I sadly learned the news of the death of a colleague, the author of this morning's reading, Reverend Nancy Schaefer. I so regret that I never got the chance to meet Nancy in person, but I have made best friends over the years with her words. My dog-eared copy of her meditation manual, Instructions in Joy, has kept me good company on my journey. In fact, I used 2 of her readings in my candidating sermon, my first Sunday with you all, back in April. Along with the news of her passing, another colleague of ours sent around that poem, Calling. And I realized that maybe this was one last gift that Nancy was giving me. How fitting to speak about calling when you have called me to be your minister. How fitting to speak about saying yes when I have said yes to you and you to me, and we are at the very beginning of something with so much anticipation. And how fitting that this exciting theme of saying yes comes all mixed up with sadness and goodbye saying, as many of our yeses come to us. After all, saying yes to one thing often means saying no or goodbye to another. As I say yes to this ministry here in Provincetown and to life on the Outer Cape, I am saying goodbye to my old life and ministry, the celebration and the mourning tumbling around with each other as I greet each day. Saying yes for me has meant moving on from my 3-year ministry at the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry in Roxbury. It has meant saying goodbye to Boston and the many amazing people I met and worked with there. Although I am so delighted to see that one of them has followed me here this morning. A special welcome to Reverend Susan Chorley, Director of the Urban Ministry's Domestic Violence Shelter Renewal House. Susan knows that it has been particularly hard for me to say goodbye to the youth in our after-school and weekend programs, who I have come to love so deeply. And though I leave them, I will continue to love them and worry about them. I am just beginning to get to know and love you here. But I do know that each of you are also being called to say yes, although I do not know what is calling each of you, or what goodbyes you might have to say in order to answer yes, or what might be waiting for you on the other side. For Christy Hardwick, a member of this congregation who I have actually not met yet, but who I have been writing to, saying yes to the life she wanted meant saying goodbye to stuff. She said, for decades I had toiled under the assumption that more was better. More money, more things, and bigger experiences. The more I achieved, the more I felt I had to achieve. At one point I recognized that all my work and focus on the outside was making little difference to how I felt on the inside. Success Money and what looked like a good life left Christy feeling bereft instead of inspired or exhilarated. She focused on doing what she thought was right and necessary for her 3 children rather than herself. And then one day, she looked at herself in the mirror and realized that she needed a life that would make her happy. She said, this spiritual awakening, beginning with the understanding that I could author a new life and that my doing so was good for everyone concerned, began a love affair with the inner life that has been growing and deepening for more than a decade. When I told the truth to myself and my family, she said, that I did not any longer care to have a lot, but that I had a desire for freedom, we were able to say yes to selling off property in California, even at a loss, and settle into the smallest house any of us had ever been in. Christy said goodbye to her big life in California and yes to her tiny house in Provincetown, and she is happy in her tiny house, which is across the street from a spectacular view and around the corner from the breakwater where she sees people clamming. When Christy said yes to this move, I think it was because she had finally experienced the joy that following her heart could bring. This joy first came when she said yes to marrying her wife, Jane. Before I met Jane, she said, I was married twice, and both times I was outside the church crying, but went ahead and did it anyway. There was no yes in my body for those marriages, but I denied my inner prompting and did what I thought I should want to do. Christy says, when Jane and I married here on the beach 6 years ago, I was singing all the way to her hand in mine. I said yes to my inner knowing that this was the right life for me. Where were you when you heard that ancient voice? And did yes get born right then? And did you weep? Christy's daughter said recently at a family gathering, Mom, you are so much happier now than you ever have been before. And Christy smiled, thinking, yes. Lest you think this yes stuff is only about big life choices like moving across the country, getting rid of all of your belongings, and coming out, let me share with you another story. This one comes from my friend Catherine. She said, my boyfriend and I lived only 4 miles apart, a 20-minute bike ride between Jamaica Plain and Cambridge, but 45 minutes on public transportation. An avid urban biker from Chicago, he had been encouraging me to get a bike, she said. The freedom to come and go as one pleases and not wait on a bus, exercise, fresh air, what could possibly be the downside, he argued. The problem was that biking touched on a couple of deeper fears for Catherine. She has a terrible sense of direction. She's a bit clumsy. And she's very self-conscious about her appearance. For years, this self-consciousness about how she would look, are all those cars watching my rear end try to balance on this bicycle? And physical strength, what if I reach a hill? Kept her terrified with both feet on the ground. But the idea of freedom and fun was exciting to her, and the boyfriend promised to teach her. So she decided to bite the bullet and said yes to biking. She brought her bike from the 8th grade from North Carolina to Boston. As it turns out, the bike had more longevity than the boyfriend. 5 months later, after only 4 or 5 rides together, the relationship had ended. I was just starting to get the hang of it, Catherine said. I could do one route that I felt familiar with, but mostly I was terrified of biking alone. Traffic was scary, roads were narrow. This was a dumb idea, for sure. But there is something else that you should know about my friend Catherine. Besides the clumsiness and the self-doubt, Catherine does not like to be defeated. The problem was something had gone wrong with the bike, and Catherine had no idea how to fix it. She took it to the shop across the street, owned by, in her words, intimidating JP hipsters. She got through the words, "I got a bike because my boyfriend wanted me to ride with him, and we broke up," before she started crying. Through her tears, she continued, "And now there's something wrong with it, and it won't work at all, and I have no idea what to do." They stared at her. Mostly, she says, to avoid dealing with the impending emotional breakdown, they looked at the bike right away. Turns out the bike, broken beyond all repair in Catherine's mind, had lost its chain. One of the intimidating hipsters fixed it in about 5 seconds and said, "Hey, it's gonna be okay. No charge. Just keep riding." And that is what she did. She was scared that first ride out alone. She got off the bike at each intersection and walked the bike across. But she was doing it. "I was terrified," she said, "but I also felt so free and brave." When she got home that day, she had another cry. She was proud of herself, but so sad too. Was this life, she wondered? Having to make huge leaps alone when things didn't go the way you anticipated? Feeling like most things in life are a combination of, "My God, this is terrifying," and "My God, I'm amazing." Being sad and wondering if she would be okay by herself. But in that deep cry was also the comfort of knowing that if she could learn to bike alone, then she could face greater fears too. Looking back, she said, saying yes to the bike changed my life forever and for the better. When I thought about this story and saying yes, I had said yes to one thing and it turned out to be this whole other experience. I thought I was saying yes to riding a bike with my boyfriend. I love my bike now because it gives me freedom. I feel strong and capable when I ride. And even when I fall off, I have learned to give myself more grace. We can't know how anything will go, she says, but it is so good to be able to trust and love yourself enough to try. I recently rewatched Jim Carrey's 2008 movie, Yes Man. If you haven't seen it, the premise is that 3 years after his bitter divorce, Carrey's character, Carl, has fallen into the habit of saying no to everything. No to social events with friends, no to small business loan applications at his work, even no to a promotion because he didn't want to commit or be tied down. He is full of excuses. "Oh, I'll be out of town. There's a lot going on at work right now. Oh, wish I could, but I can't." Once we have gotten the picture about his glum outlook on life, we are introduced to another character, an old friend of Carl's who invites him to a yes seminar. Of course, Carl says no. But then the friend says, "Carl, live your life. You won't regret it." So he decides to go to the seminar. The charismatic seminar leader tells the crowd, "When you say yes to things, you embrace the possible." He then picks a member out of the audience to work with one-on-one in front of the group. Of course, it's Carl. And of course, he says, "No, thank you," to this opportunity. But the leader prevails. He gives Carl a challenge. Actually, he convinces him to make a covenant that from that moment on, Carl will say yes to every request, invitation, and opportunity that comes his way. And the plot of the movie comes to life. As he exits the conference, a homeless man asks him for a ride, and then to borrow his phone, and then for money, all his money. Carl grudgingly agrees. Carl runs out of gas giving the homeless man a ride, but he can't call AAA because his phone battery has died from all the calls the homeless man has been making. After a long walk to the gas station, a young woman offers him a ride back to his car on her motorcycle. Terrified, Carl says yes. When his boss calls him to work on a Saturday, Carl says yes, and also begins approving all kinds of microloans, which impress the bosses, and earns Carl a promotion, which he says yes to. Soon he is learning to play the guitar, volunteering with the homeless, and taking Korean classes. This being a Jim Carrey film, of course, some of the things that Carl says yes to are wildly inappropriate, but I won't dwell on those. Carl is enjoying life so much more now, but he's also becoming kind of a maniac and getting very little sleep. His new girlfriend, you guessed it, it's the girl with the motorcycle. Can't tell if Carl really loves her or if he just had to say yes to being with her because of the crazy yes covenant. Desperate, Carl goes to find the leader of the yes seminar again. The man can't believe that Carl is still saying yes to everything. It was just an exercise, he explains, not a lifelong covenant. In the end, says the seminar leader, you're saying yes, not because you have to, but because your heart tells you to. Not because you have to, but because your heart tells you to. Perhaps we can take a spiritual lesson from Carl and his covenant to say yes. I'm not asking you to say yes to everything. I've seen where that leads. I'm challenging you to listen for what your heart is telling you to say yes to. I'm challenging you to remind yourself daily that it is the things we say yes to and not our no's that give shape to our life. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to say yes to you, all of you, the birthright locals and the retired wash-ashores, the weekend visitors and the hardy year-rounders. I look forward to many years of being your minister. I hope that as we get to know one another, I can learn about what it is that is calling you, about what is holding you back, and what joy you have found in saying yes. I think Catherine said it best when she said, saying yes, for me at least, means saying yes over and over again. Where were you when you heard that calling voice? And how, in the moment, did you mark it? How, ever after, are you changed? Amen. And blessed be.